Hi, I'm Shankar. I'm Chief India Economist, and I also look at strategy, equity strategy. So broadly, what we look at is the macroeconomy, both India as well as the global economy, and its implications on different sectors and businesses. Uh, and we look at the different macro parameters, leading as well as past indicators to tell us how the economy is doing. This incoming budget would be a special one because of a couple of reasons. One being this is the third union budget being presented by the Modi government, and so we are close to midway, and perhaps this would be the last budget before you can have really difficult uh, reforms to be pushed, and before we get closer to the next election cycle. So that's one. And two, also because if you look at the revenue and expenditure side of the budget, then you really do not have too much of levers or too much of space to do something very drastic. So, for example, on the revenue expenditure side, there's very little room for maneuvering by the government. And also on the revenue side, you also have something which is uh, very typical of the last 2 years, which is basically your nominal GDP has been declining and contracting. So, in such a scenario, there is definitely going to be some pressure on the fiscal deficit number. So, the first thing that I am going to look for is how is the government planning to accommodate for the seventh pay commission recommendations this year, because this is going to be valid, or this is going to be implemented from 1st of January 2016. Although it would be the payout will start most likely from 1st of April, so there would be a arrear of 3 months. So it's going to be very difficult because it's a huge, large amount of money incrementally going out to the tune of more than 1 lakh crores. That's 1 trillion rupees. Now, basically, the challenges are the following: you need to maintain the public capex, which has been significantly high, at least in the last 12 to 15 months. 25% growth is the number that the government had budgeted last year, and this year for FY16, and I think they will get about 20 to 22% increase YOY. Next year, it would be challenging to keep up with such a high public capex capital expenditure number, given the fact that there would be significant amount of revenue expenditure happening on account of the seventh pay commission higher wage bill. Now, in all of this, there's also a pressure on fiscal consolidation. So, as per the original FRBM Act, you need to cut down the fiscal deficit ratio to 3.5% from the budgeted current year 3.9%. So there is a debate which has started very recently on the need for a pro-cyclical fiscal policy, which basically means policy which is consolidation of fiscal deficit, especially in a time when you have nominal GDP which is declining. Uh, and the other competing, or if one likes, the other competing issue is the credibility of the government numbers and the government budgetary uh, estimates. So it would be interesting to see how the government manages to accommodate the higher expenditure on account of higher wage bill, and also on account of the need for higher capex, because that is something which is keeping up the growth and also the productivity and crowding in private investment, hopefully in due course of time, and not really giving a signal that the fiscal consolidation roadmap has been in a sense not been adhered to, and hence some amount of erosion of credibility of the government's budgetary numbers. So these are the two challenges. Besides that, I would be looking at what are the allocations for different infra projects, what are the different allocations for sectors which are focused mostly towards rural India, because of late there's been a lot of distress which has been reported from rural India, especially after two successive years of poor monsoon. So that being the background, and that being also the background for corporate India, because rural demand has not been anything to go by. If you look at the four pillars of aggregate demand, then consumption demand in India has been the bedrock of growth, and that too only coming from urban demand, urban consumption demand. So the rural demand has to kind of come in and support the overall aggregate demand, and thereafter when the capacity utilization kind of improves to say around 80 to 85% from the current 70 to 72%, corporates will start looking at capacity constraints, and then they will automatically start putting in more capex. So once you put the entire economy into a virtuous cycle of higher demand leading to higher investment, leading to higher growth, thereby that again fueling higher demand, then you kind of reach out to higher trajectories of growth. So that is something which the incoming budget can act as a catalyst, and that is something which I would be looking forward to. Among the sectoral wish list, if you like, uh, well, the automobile sector would be looking at definitely the 7th pay commission implementation deadline, and the timeline and the modality of it. The different other sectors would be having different wish lists, like wish list on MAT and some cut in corporate taxes, as has been promised by the current finance minister in the last budget. So that's again timed and phased out. So we would like to see a clear roadmap on what is the government, thinking on how do they plan to cut down, and how do they plan to phase it in the years to come. Besides that, any indication of any incremental new reform, including obviously the GST. So, what is the kind of number that they are keying in their budget estimates for GST rollout, if at all, if any, and that can give some confidence to market participants on whether the government is in a position or is confident of being able to get the GST through. Besides that, I would also be looking at the expenditure mix of the government. So, is it going more towards revenue expenditure or capital expenditure? Because of late in the last few months, the number that we are getting, we are seeing is we're getting a pleasant surprise, if you like, in the sense that public capex, which is capital expenditure, is outpacing revenue expenditure. Next year, it would be challenging because revenue expenditure will be bloated by, if you like, by the 7th pay commission. So it will not be wise to anticipate a similar kind of outpacing of capex by to revenue expenditure. But it would be interesting to see, even in absolute number, whether we are seeing a significant increase in infrastructure spending, especially in rural areas, in areas like irrigation, in road construction, and in power generation.